I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. On the House floor Thursday, Representative David Schweikert delivered fiery remarks on Social Security and Medicare. He explained what he described as the, quote, cruelty of what the left has done to the poor, but particularly to the elderly poor. Schweikert blamed inflation on Democrats' economic policies and warned of its future impact on the nation's over 65 population. Here's more from the Arizona Republican.
We're going to do something that's new to me today, and please wave at me if I start machine gun speaking. And I've gotten teased about it a bit. So this week, I got to become the ranking member for the Republicans. That's sort of the senior Republican over Social Security in the Ways and Means Committee. And it's an area I've had a fascination with since I got here because, it's $1 trillion a year and it's running out of money. And so the last few times I've come behind these microphones, I've turned to my brothers and sisters on the left and have begged them to stop doing what they're doing because we've showed board after board after board of how many people they're hurting. The working poor, the working middle class is just being destroyed by Democrat policies. And look, I appreciate the virtue signaling. I understand maybe for many of them, they didn't understand the most basic economics of what inflation was going to do in crushing people. But now all of a sudden, I have the responsibility, and I take this really seriously. How do you save Medicare? How do you save Social Security? And it's not a game, and it's not just little adjustments here. You talk to groups, even fellow members, and they somehow think a little adjustment here, waste and fraud, a little adjustment here. We are talking trillions. Remember, our best math right now is functioning over the next 30 years, just Social Security and just Medicare. When you add them together and then the financing costs are close to $120 trillion short. So functioning every dime of future debt is the shortfall in Medicare and Social Security. It's demographics. We got old. At the end of this decade, 22% of us are 65 and older. A country like Japan is 30%. Japan has dramatically higher savings rates. At the end of this decade, 22% of our neighbors will be 65 or older. And we functionally have nothing set aside for that. Medicare is moving to being 100% general fund. The Medicare Trust Fund, the Part A, the hospital portion, we got a good number a couple days ago, so now it's gone in about 5 years. And we have no idea how we replace that, because the model right now, as it's written in statute, is, hey, just stop paying doctors and hospitals. That's going to work really well, isn't it? And we'll see here, the actuarial report for Social Security got extended out a bit, but functionally in a decade, our parents, our grandma and grandpa, the model is at this moment 27% cut. And that isn't the true story. It's much, much, much darker. And I'm going to do my very best here. And look, I got to be honest, I'm only partially through starting to dig through the numbers that keep handed to me, and we're trying to understand the Medicare actuaries and the Social Security actuaries. They've just published their report, but it's based on data that may be as much as a year out of date. They've missed much of the inflation cycle, so one of the benchmarks was February this year. We'll think about what's happened to inflation since then. And I'm going to do my best right now to present the cruelty, just the cruelty of what the left has done to the poor, but particularly to the elderly poor. And once again, I'll give them credit. I don't think it was meant, but there's a misunderstanding here of what inflation does, because it's not just today. It's not just this year. We're trying to build a model here of how many of our brothers and sisters who are older at the end of this decade are going to be living in poverty because what this place did this last year. So my best model right now is about 22% of our brothers and sisters who are 65 and older are living in poverty today. And it's a back-of-the-napkin math, and I may be wrong, and God, I hope I'm wrong, but if inflation stays substantially above the mean for a few more years, it's going to be a third of our retirees are going to be living in poverty. This is what they did. And so in past weeks, I've come behind the mic and said, here's ideas to knock down inflation. If inflation is too many dollars chasing too few goods, let's make more goods. Because right now, the passive approach, we had Janet Yellen in front of the Ways and Means Committee yesterday, and it's basically, well, we're going to let the Federal Reserve jack up interest rates, put a bunch of people out of their work, and we're just going to raise the misery, but it's their problem. Has nothing to do with the crappy economic policies that have been pushed through this body. How about some things the left and the right could agree upon of instead of just spending trillions and trillions of dollars, how about incentives and mechanisms to create productivity? Because when you make more stuff, that's the most elegant way to knock down inflation. Of course, that would mean for our brothers and sisters on the Democrat side to accept something called supply-side economics. So first, we need a little bit of a reference here. And these numbers are almost 2 years out of date because we haven't got a CBO updated number yet, which I believe should have already happened. But projected 2051. So let's basically 29 years from now. Outlays as a percentage of GDP. And this is policy. This should be driving every bit of policy around here. We chase shiny objects all day long, but we're basically saying, hey, Social Security and Medicare, the dedicated revenues, the revenues we expect to be getting in over that 29 years are going to be about 6% of GDP. Outlays will be almost 21% of GDP. The rest of the budget, revenues actually exceed outlays. So once again, got to get this through our heads. Medicare, Social Security, the baseline from a couple years ago was 112. My math says it's about 120 trillion of borrowing. The rest of the budget's in balance. Why isn't this what we talk about every single day? Don't we care about the functionally 22% of our brothers and sisters who are going to be 65 or older by the end of this decade? Do we not have a moral, an ethical, an economic obligation to fix a system that's collapsing? And it's been collapsing for years. And it used to be, you've all heard the saying, it's the third rail. I've been teased by some of my colleagues here, Schweikert, you're an idiot, which may be absolutely true. But your willingness to take on Social Security, have you decided to end your political career? You can't get in front of microphones and tell people the truth about the math. They don't want to hear that. They've been lied to for decades. And they believe the lies because the lies are comfortable. You can't show them the slides of what's actually about to happen. Yet, how do you fix something unless you admit there's a problem? And this place is like an alcoholic who's unwilling to take that first step at their 12-step meeting, admit they have a problem. And if this board doesn't tell you the problem, I don't know what will. This board is functionally 2 years old. Once again, I don't have an updated number from CBO. This shows 112 trillion of borrowing solely from Social Security and Medicare. Obviously, Medicare is functionally 3/4 of the problem. Social Security is 1/4 of the problem. But that's $112 trillion, 2 years number, my current number, 120 trillion of borrowing in today's dollars. So in inflation baseline dollars. And the inflation that has exploded in the last year because of Democrat fiscal policies makes these numbers much uglier. And just as a reference, just understand why I'm so concerned and why I'm just mad this place isn't on fire with almost a level of panic over these numbers. When you see this scale of debt, in a couple decades, if the mean borrowing cost is 2 points higher, in about 20, 25 years, every dime of tax revenues, tax receipts, every dime is just the interest cost. Do you get that? Do you realize the level of fragility we've given to this country? Do you care about people, care about kids? Do you care about seniors? Then this should be the fixation, because this is real math. And unless somehow the Democrats have come up with a way to repeal the laws of mathematics, this is what we're up against. And yes, you will be booed when you get up in front of an audience and say, hey, do you realize Social Security in about a decade, you'll get about a 27% cut? And that's not even calculating the dramatic increase in your Medicare portion of your premiums that for many, many, many seniors will eat up every dime of their Social Security check. This is real. It's the biggest thing going on in our country at this moment, but it's like a slow-moving avalanche coming at us. It's going to wipe us out, but it's not here yet, so let's worry about something else. And just to emphasize a little bit, Medicare faces a $78 trillion cash shortfall over the next, and this is now 29 years, and the number's worse now. Once again, I just haven't gotten an update because this is 21 numbers, and we should be already starting to project the 22 and 23 numbers. But do you see that? We have about 20 trillion coming in payroll taxes and almost 98 trillion in projected expenditures, and this is before the inflation cycle. And medical inflation, baseline inflation, is going to drive these numbers up dramatically. So, and maybe this is too much of a current snapshot, but you're starting to see it. Everyone just got, if you're on Medicare, you just got it functionally. Your health care costs just bounced up for Part B, $250 a person, $500 a couple. And the dirty number is that's not even close to what's coming. So that's what you just got. And going, whoa, it went up $500. But functionally 2 years from now, we may get as much as an 8% COLA, because remember, the COLA adjustment on Social Security functionally is about 24 months behind. It takes that long to get the calculations. So if a community like mine, I represent the Phoenix, Scottsdale area, has the highest inflation in the nation. So my area is over 11% inflation. But they'll do a national mean, which will probably be closer to 8 something. And you're not going to get that for a couple years. So you're going to get a 3 plus, 3.5 plus this year. And you're going to get to live poor, substantially poor for the next couple of years. And the COLA's not going to keep up. The basket that is used to calculate doesn't keep up. And it's already begun. The eating up of how you survive in retirement is already begun. The money's disappearing. So this is, and we're working on this. This is a work in progress. So this is a dangerous speech for me to be giving, because I'm going to anger a number of people who don't want to know the truth. I'm going to anger a bunch of my brother and sister members here that are terrified their voters find out. And the fact of the matter is, I will be back here in a couple of weeks revising these numbers. But this is from some of the best literature we've found when I found out I was going to be taking on the responsibility over Social Security. And what this board is basically saying is, this is your cost. So if you're 65 years old today and you're stepping into retirement, you're functionally we expect your out-of-pocket to be, have gone up about $85,000. Assumption, healthcare inflation remains at 1.5% over consumer price index for 2 years. So this is the change you get if it's 2 years. Problem is, my Joint Economic Committee is saying the structure of inflation may be with us for a decade. Now, it may not be running at, like my neighborhood, 11%, or your neighborhood, probably 8%, for another 7, 10 years, but it's going to be higher than norm. We're having to rebuild all of our models. And what does this mean, though, if it's just for 2 years? If you're 45 years old, the change in your cost when you hit retirement that you are going to have to be contributing to the health care portion. So you get your Social Security check, the portion that is put off for the health care, for Medicare. You're 45 years old, just these 2 years of the above inflation, it's $250,000. And that's out of your pocket. We keep talking about, well, here's your fuel prices today, and fine, be outraged about that, you should be. But to understand the cascade effect that we are going to drive so many people into poverty through the rest of this decade and at the end of this decade. And this place is silent. We're just silent on the damage we're doing to people's survival. Because the shiny object is what's at the gas pump right now, and you should be enraged. The economic devastation, the misery the left has foisted on this country, and I'm sorry, I'm being a bit of a jerk, but they did it, and they were warned. And they weren't warned by my kind, well, they were warned by my kind, but they were warned by their own economists. And yes, they have about a dozen economists that said, go ahead and spend the trillions, it won't make a difference. Please stop listening to them. But you did have a number of your leftist economists who said, don't do this, you're going to hurt people. But it buys us votes, and they did it. Congratulations. This is your future. And this is only if it lasts, if the increased inflation lasts for 2 years. What if my model is correct and it lasts throughout the decade? And this isn't my math. This is some of the literature we're finding out there. We haven't had time to break it down and do our best vetting, but these all came from, big boy researchers, well-respected. And this is a little hard to get our head around, but we're going to do our best here. So short-term healthcare inflation can have devastating retirement consequences. What they're basically saying is the spike today in healthcare costs, you turn 65, you start getting your Medicare, you start getting your Social Security. The change in cost you have for the next 20 years is in these numbers. And they're basically trying to say, what happens if you're 65, you have 1 year of the current medical inflation, and this is underestimating it. The latest number I had as of this week was in the high 16s for healthcare inflation. This one is 15.8. But just the increase in your health care cash, this isn't your Medicare payment, this is cash coming out of your Social Security check, out of your bank account. So you're 65, it's going to be an additional $72,000. But if you're 45 today, and this increase in inflation is only for 2 years, it's $434,000 of additional spending you need to be prepared for in your retirement. This is the math. So just a little bit of healthcare inflation today. So if the baseline is 8.3, that's my prediction for tomorrow's May number. We'll see how accurate I am. Healthcare is almost double the baseline inflation. If you had it if it ran at that for 2 years and then went back to the mean, and you're 45 years old today, so you retire 20-some years from now, the change in the baseline of your future cost now is approaching $500,000. Well, in this case, $434,000. Let's be a little more accurate. Is anyone here talking about this? How many people with the savings you have right now, with just trying to survive buying that tank of gas today, are going to be able to save enough money to have your future expenses, that Social Security check you have, basically disappear, shrink away, because you are now having to deal with the inflationary costs? And that's why my back of the napkin math, or back of the envelope math, I think is the colloquialism, is starting to say, oh my God, I hope my math is wrong. But where this is going right now, I think we're heading towards about a third of our retirees being in poverty in a decade. And remember, Social Security was an anti-poverty program. But once again, crappy public policy here by the left, and this is the decades and decades of future misery they brought to us. Does anyone on the other side own a calculator, or actually showed up at their economics class? Social Security income functionally gets erased by rising healthcare costs. Now, this is what brought this for me to do this on the floor. This last weekend, I had inklings I was going to get the responsibility over Social Security for the Republicans. And so, I don't sleep well. The only way I fall asleep often is I sit up and read, and I try to read stuff that's actually important to this job. And I came across this article that functionally was alluding, but didn't have good math in it, and it was alluding that the healthcare inflation, and this is beyond just all the other inflation of just trying to buy food and pay for your rent and everything else, just healthcare inflation was going to consume many seniors' entire Social Security check. And so I don't get credit for this. My staff actually found this. But let's actually go back to our 45-year-old, this bottom line. So this is for a couple, because they found this on someone else's literature, so I can't take credit for the math. A couple, they're going to get about $1.153, so $1,153,000 in Social Security benefits when that 45-year-old couple basically enters their Social Security benefits. Okay. But with the inflation that has been built in, and this is, I think, only a couple years of inflation, but the calculation over 20 years. With the change of inflation, so they're going to get $1,153,000 in Social Security benefits, but they're going to spend functionally out of their pocket $1,543,000 in healthcare costs. And that's with Medicare. Does anyone see a problem? So you start looking at the lifetime retirement healthcare costs when it's 1.8. Baseline cost projection, 2-year of inflation cost projection. They're functionally, their healthcare cost in this model is 156%. So every dime of their Social Security check plus another 56% that they're going to have to find other resources to pay for just to cover their health care because of inflation. The couple that turned 65 today, or actually a month or so when this calculation was done, because remember, this calculation undercalculates inflation. This was done almost back in February numbers, and inflation turned out to be much worse. It's going to give that couple's, as mean across the country, is going to get about $968,000 in Social Security benefits over what we calculate as the average mortality numbers lifetime. 71% of their Social Security income, 71% of their Social Security income is going to health care costs substantially driven by this increase in inflation. So if anyone's listening right now, God, I hope I'm wrong. Start saving every dime you can. Because this government Democrat policies from this last 2 years has absolutely screwed you over. We are going to spend the rest of the decade fixing the damage that was done in the last 15 months. And the math is the math. And if I'm being hyperbolic, I'm doing because it's important. I don't want to live in a country where a third of my seniors are in poverty because of a decision they made a year ago. And this is the actuarial report on Social Security and Medicare when the trust funds are gone, and there's a problem with their math. And that is it was done on February's baseline, and inflation is dramatically higher than what we thought the February baseline was. And now the economists are saying it's going to last much longer, meaning these dates are going to erode. But functionally, you're 66 months, according to the actuarial report, and Medicare Part A, the hospital portion, is gone. So functionally, you go into your hospital and your doctor doesn't get paid to see you. How's that going to work out? Seriously, who's going to pay? The new number is about 150 months for Social Security. I think that's wildly optimistic in this inflationary investment time. But the baseline model, how are you going to do? So do you plan to live for another 10 years? Okay. So whether that 10 years be you're on Social Security or you're heading into retirement, are you prepared to have not 25 but 27% of your Social Security check disappear? At the same time, I'm showing you charts saying, hey, you're 65 today. Because of medical inflation, if it lasts where we're at 2 years, 71% of your Social Security money is going to health care costs, and we're also then going to reach over and reduce your Social Security check by 27%. Does anyone else see a problem coming? This place doesn't own a calculator, and yet, as I used to get teased when I was a child, the math always wins. But this place will avoid the math because it's hard. It's the sort of thing that gets you unelected. It's the sort of thing that makes your voters mad. And it's your absolute moral obligation to fix these programs without lying. In a future presentation, I'm going to come back here and I'm going to also overlay the private pension systems, the multi-employer pension systems, all the other shortfalls. And if any member here uses the word retirement security and isn't bathing and fixing these numbers, you should be ashamed of yourself. And with that, Madam Speaker, I'm going to yield back, and I apologize for the amount of caffeine I've had today, but I'm not here to be hyperbolic. I am here to beg of this place to stop chasing the daily shiny object that may get us some press, get us a few minutes on cable television. This is the hard work we're elected to fix, and it's also our moral obligation to save the future. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Under the